Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director for the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. We have Jeff Johnson with AARP going to talk about the Affordable Care Act, but you know it better as Obamacare.
Yes. Jeff is the state director. He is well-versed in all the requirements and just exactly where this ought to be taking us. We know there's a lot of confusion out there on this subject. So we'll invite you to stay put. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV. I am Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. That's right, folks. We are on Tough TV. Now you can watch us here on Thursdays at 9 and Saturdays at 9 a.m. on Tough TV 838 in Orlando. You can receive Tough TV 38 over the air with an antenna. It's in select apartment complexes, so if you don't live in one of those apartment complexes now, I suggest you move there. We're also in mobile home parks in Central Florida, and Tough TV 38 is also carried on Channel 69, dude, on the Summit Broadband cable TV system. If you can't receive our programming, ask your cable system or satellite provider, or do that thing about moving that I talked to you about earlier before, to carry Tough TV 38 today.
There you go. All right. Well, we are delighted to have your company, whether it's on the radio or on the television, and we think you're going to be very interested in this hour ahead. Jeff Johnson, the state director of the AARP, is going to join us. We're going to focus on Obamacare, but we have a couple of other items that we want to get out of the way first, right, Al?
We do. We have a couple of items here. We have Alan Grayson, who we like to have on from time to time. He is a hard man to pin down. Liberals think he's one of them. Conservatives think he's nuts. And Alan just does what he does, you know. So, but here are conservatives and Alan see eye to eye, and that is over Syria. Yes, we've talked a lot about Syria on the last show, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. There is a little reported German intelligence report. Now, this intelligence report states that there were rogue Syrian army officials possibly who deployed this poison gas without permission on Assad, kind of changes the landscape on this issue. And Alan Grayson has talked. This is a little reported, of course, report because it doesn't jibe with the rest of the whole spiel, where Assad is the next incarnation of Adolf Hitler. Every dictator that does this that we want to go against is the next incarnation of Hitler. Mm-hmm. We heard Debbie Wasserman Schultz talk about the Holocaust, which I think belittles the Holocaust. But, you know, that's political rhetoric. And we have Alan Grayson, who's talking the straight talk. And, of course, Alan and Debbie, same party, different point of view. Grayson puts more stock in this report. He says, therefore, he doesn't believe President Obama's saber-rattling over Syria led Assad to agree to talks about giving up his chemical stockpile. Assad sees the writing on the wall. If people think that he's the guy who let the gas out, well, now he could say, hey, just take the gas away. I don't even want the gas. If he's been bucking his own army people, well, according to the German report, well, of course he wants to get rid of it. And, of course, this is the quote from Grayson. It's a good outcome if the president wants to take credit for it, meaning the Syrian chemical weapons talks. That's fine with me. Maybe he'll win a second Nobel Peace Prize. Ouch, Reagan.
Yes, I will. Wow. Well, you know, perhaps those days of the stinging comment aren't over. You know, we went through a period of time here where it was speculated that Mr. Grayson was going to calm down and become a little more centrist.
But we wouldn't want Grayson calm down. You know what? Everybody else is playing the game, but I like the fact that Alan is taking an alternate point of view. Here's another quote from him. German intelligence has indicated that Assad did not order these attacks, and in fact that Assad has tried to prevent the use of chemical weapons This does not sound Hitler-like. By his army, and there's been a breakdown in command and control of those weapons. The German intelligence sources imply that the Syrian government itself recognizes these chemical weapons are no longer within its control and therefore are dangerous to it. And therefore, it's literally in everybody's interest that the weapons be removed from Syria. Well, I agree with Alan.
I do
think
too.
It's the way to go.
It's an interesting thing. We have to take a break, but I go back to where we were last week. But what has developed between Mr. Putin and Mr. Obama? The question that goes unanswered is if it is proven that Assad was behind this, and we go down the Putin-Obama road. Where's the punishment?
Yes, exactly. Well, and then think about the greater picture, which I don't think a lot of people are thinking of, but we're going to tell you briefly here on Florida Roundtable so that you can be informed. This is a proxy war, and we'll discuss more of that after we talk with our guests from AARP. We'll tell you a little bit more about the proxy war between Russia and the U.S. and between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Jeff Johnson, the state director of the AARP, joins us as the Florida Roundtable continues in a moment. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised, we are joined at this point in the program by Mr. Jeff Johnson. He is the state director of the AARP. And Jeff, welcome to the Florida Roundtable.
Thank you, Reagan, and thank you, Al.
Before we get started, take a minute and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal background, and how you ended up as the state director of the AARP.
Well, I am a Florida resident from near birth, so I can't quite say I'm a native, but I grew up in Jacksonville and have lived in St. Petersburg for about the last 15 years, have been all over the state, and have worked for AARP in the Florida State Office for the last 13 years. I've been state director for the last year.
You know, I find something very funny all the time when people go, well, you know, I'm a native, and maybe I'm an almost native. It gives you more cred if you were born here,
Right.
I guess.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I moved when I was 2 months old, but, you know, I want to say I'm a native, but...
I got here in 95, but you know what? If anyone doesn't like it, you know where they could go, so it's fine. But so we're talking about the Affordable Care Act, a.k.a. Obamacare. And, of course, like we were talking just before the interview, both of these are a bit politically charged statements. So what is it? Is it Obamacare? Because the president said now he likes the sound of Obamacare because, well, it has his name in it. Or is it the Affordable Care Act? What are we calling this piece of legislation?
I think, at this point, Obamacare seems to be the term that most people recognize, but people, frankly, are so confused by this program that anything that translates in your mind to a more affordable health insurance, I think, is going to be a positive thing. So some people are going to still call it the Affordable Care Act. It's going to be Obamacare. I suspect in the next couple of years, if Florida is to start its own exchange or its own marketplace for insurance, it'll give it a Florida name, and then that'll confuse everybody a little bit more.
Well, that's the thing. People are confused. Reagan, tell Jeff about your confusion.
Well, I have received a Medicare card in the mail effective December the 1st. And so I wonder how all of this affects me. We have October deadlines, and, right at the moment, I am in that several million group that doesn't have health care coverage. I'm figuring we're so close to December. But so what do I have to do? Do I have to go out and buy something that's going to cover me for October and November? And
a real good question, Reagan. And the way this the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is rolling out, the enrollment process begins in October, which is, by the way, for listeners who are already on Medicare, that's roughly the same time that the Medicare open enrollment period is. So in neither case does the insurance actually kick in until January 1st. So you need to focus on enrolling in Medicare and not worry about all the Obamacare stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In fact, I was talking with my parents earlier this week, and they were confused too, thinking, okay, so with Obamacare we have to sign up for something different, and that is not true. If you're on Medicare now, you continue through the Medicare process. You enroll, you pick the plans that you want, just like you did in past years.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a reason why, I guess. Like I said, part of the confusion. We still have a Congress trying to defund Obamacare. What's the status of that? as far as the AARP. What are you guys seeing? Is that going to be successful? Is that going to throw a monkey wrench into the whole works? Is it just political posturing? What are you seeing?
Yeah, my impression is that political debate is going to go on for years to come, and so there will likely be little flare-ups like the current one. Just when Medicare started, there were fights over Medicare for a few years until it finally died down, and so our focus has been. Look, the folks on the left and the right, they can fight out this stuff as long as they want. Right now, this is the law. It's going to kick in with the exchanges or the marketplaces opening up in October. People are going to start getting insurance in January. There are a lot of people confused. Let the partisans fight, and we're going to focus on trying to get good information out to people so they know what they need to do.
Well, and in that regard, let's do that. How does this law, we'll just call it Obamacare, that's the colloquial name, that's what everybody knows it as. How does Obamacare affect people that are 50 plus?
Well, if you're under 65, particularly we're focused on those who are 50 and older. If you're under 65, then you need to pay attention to all that you're going to be hearing come October 1st about the new marketplace, the new place where you go buy health insurance if you don't have insurance right now, if you don't have employer-based insurance, or if you have insurance that you're buying individually, separately from your company. If you're over 65, tune out the Obamacare stuff. Just focus on your Medicare open enrollment period just like you do every other year.
Well, I'm 43. I'll be 44 in December, and I have insurance through my employer, so I don't have to worry about Obamacare. Is Obamacare just for people that don't have employer-based insurance, and how does that work?
That's a good question, Al. And I think that that's where there's a lot of confusion because so many of us get our insurance through our employer. And in almost every case, that won't change at all. There may be some employers who change their health insurance plans from this year to next year, but frankly, that's happened for the last 20, 30 years. Every year, your employer may change something here or there. But for most people, they'll just continue with that employer-based plan, and they, too, can tune out the Obamacare stuff. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, if that's the case, then why is there still all this rhetoric about employers being shaky on Obama? If they don't have to change anything, according to the answer that you just gave me, why are they still bucking this and saying that, there's uncertainty in the market, that's why we're not having an economic recovery like we should, as robust as we should? What is your take on that?
I've heard everything from market conditions to employment to the weather blamed on Obamacare. I think that this is a political football, as you guys have said. It's one that people get riled up about, and so they throw everything that way. We'll see what happens, obviously, going forward. But so far, what we've heard so far is it's pretty rare that you've seen insurers or employers make major changes on their health insurance because of this. And I think that what you're going to see going forward is probably, I don't know about you, Al, but for me, every year there are always some changes, whether the premiums go up or the copays go up or the deductibles, although we'll have to see what that looks like this year. But again, for most people who are getting their employer-based insurance, that's going to continue next year with very little change.
Well, now let me ask you this. I'm going to back up for a minute. An awful lot of debate about how Obamacare could possibly destroy Medicare. Medicare beneficiaries, should they be worried? Are they about to lose their health coverage because of Obamacare?
Great question, Reagan. And I agree with you that there are a lot of folks out there who have been worried about this, and it's really too bad because actually what the Affordable Care Act, what Obamacare has done, has added some new benefits and some new things that have helped Medicare beneficiaries. The biggest of which, in fact, is prescription drug coverage. Now, in the George W. Bush administration, a new program started called Medicare Part D that provided drug coverage, and it's a great program, except it had this big coverage gap called a donut hole. And if you talk to folks who've been on Medicare for a while, they'll groan and tell you about the donut hole. It's the thing that we heard more than anything as the problem in Medicare. And the Affordable Care Act actually makes changes to help close that coverage gap and give people consistent prescription drug coverage.
Well, I thought those were called munchkins, and you get them at the Dunkin' Donuts,
I know. I'm not used to people complaining about donut holes, but in this context, you can kind of tell if it's a smile, you're talking munchkins. If it's a frown, down, you're talking about Medicare Part D in the past. But hopefully this will be a thing in the past.
Well, so basically, what are you hearing about from older Americans? There's a lot of older folks listen to Florida Roundtables, younger folks too. We run the gamut. And what are you hearing about their fears about the Medicare? I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks spreading rumors, and there have been a lot of people, as I think Reagan said earlier, who are trying to make it sound like Obamacare is going to replace Medicare, and that's not in the law, nor do we see that happening. The Medicare plans that we have today are going to continue, and our role is really to reassure folks, A, this doesn't change what you do in Medicare, and B, particularly around this time of year as the big blitz around enrollment gears up for both programs, Medicare and Obamacare, we want to make sure people stay in their lane, that they focus on Medicare if they're Medicare beneficiaries, and don't get distracted by all the marketing that may come around or education that comes out around Obamacare. And then vice versa, actually, Al, we have a lot of AARP members who are not yet eligible for Medicare, and the ones who have been paying for insurance out of pocket, I think, are going to be really surprised by what's available to them through the Obamacare marketplaces that they couldn't get through the private insurance system before.
Well, now, let's take a minute here, and we've talked about 50 plus and talked about people 65 and over, but what about all those people out there who are under 50? How is this going to affect them?
Mm-hmm. If you're under 65, so if you're 55, if you're 45, 35, then this is the same arena. You are needing to focus on the Obamacare marketplaces as the place where you can go buy health insurance. Now, again, if you have insurance through your employer, you can stick with that insurance through your employer. You probably should. But if you don't, if you're currently uninsured, this is an opportunity for you to purchase insurance, and you really need to. There's actually a fine for those who don't purchase health insurance. And it's not a huge fine this first year, but the point is we need everybody to be insured because that helps cut down on costs in ERs and costs to hospitals that people run up that they can't pay.
All right, so we understand that part of it. In Florida, our state government said it was not going to set up the marketplace. So Floridians have a problem.
Well, fortunately, the way the law was set up, it was intended that states would set up their own marketplace. But for the states like Florida that chose not to, the federal government will run a marketplace that has plans in Florida. So people in Florida will be able to choose from private insurance plans through the federal marketplace.
So the federal marketplace is going to trump the state marketplace that hasn't been set up yet because of politics, obviously.
They're right. Only because it hasn't been set up yet. So there are some states that are working hand in hand with the federal government to set up an exchange where they're kind of splitting the duties of what it takes to make that happen. There are some states that are setting up their own exchange, which is really the preferred thing under the assumption that states have been monitoring health insurance in the state for a lot longer. But then this federal exchange is a backstop. If nothing else, it's a good fallback.
But the bottom line here sounds to me like you have to buy a government insurance plan.
Well, and that's a really common thought that folks have. But here's the thing. These aren't government insurance plans. And for folks who are used to Medicare or have government pension, they may be kind of surprised. But these are private insurance plans. There will be the same private insurers who right now are writing health insurance for individuals are going to be writing insurance that goes through this marketplace. And the marketplace, the federal role of it is more like an online web tool. It's kind of like when people go shopping for car insurance or life insurance, they go to a website that helps take all the different vendors and tell them what their options are. Well, this is the same thing, but for health insurance.
Jeff, I'll tell you what, we need to take a pause along our network line here. We'd like to ask you if you can stick around for about another 10 minutes or so, and because we've got several more questions we'd like to ask you. All right, let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable. I'm Regan Smith. Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is Jeff Johnson, the State Director of the AARP. Our focus is on Florida and Obamacare, and we'll continue our conversation following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is Jeff Johnson, the State Director of the AARP. And Jeff, thank you for spending all this time with us today.
Not at all. Thanks for this opportunity.
You know, that has a nice ring to it, that TV thing, Reagan.
Yes, it does.
We just started simulcasting on TV here in Orlando and possibly other markets as well. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, getting to AARP, are you folks going to have a plan on the Obamacare marketplace?
Oh, no, that's a good question, and one that we've gotten before. You know, AARP isn't an insurance company, and we don't actually offer insurance, but we work with insurers and will endorse insurance products or give them the rights to use our name, but we're not actually doing that for the Obamacare marketplace.
Oh, very good. Reagan?
Well, obviously you have some plans, and over the years I know that automobile insurance and health coverage and things like that. So there is kind of a formula that AARP uses in making recommendations to seniors?
Yes, our board of directors looks at what's currently in the marketplace and whether there's a need that our members have that isn't being addressed, and if so, they'll work with any of the insurance providers in the case of insurance to identify what are some products that would actually be beneficial to members. So it could be that it could be less expensive, it could be that it's better coverage, it could be that it's more customer friendly, those sorts of things, and they figure out what the best offering is that they can put out. And I think since it's a board of directors decision, I'm not really party to what the decision process was on the Obamacare marketplace, but it may well be that we're just looking to focus, frankly, at this point, on educating people, and in some ways that's easier to do without any sort of product with an AARP name on it in the marketplace.
Well, and that's understandable. Where does AARP sit on the political spectrum as it stands? I've been wondering that because there's another organization out there that's claiming that they're the conservative voice for seniors now. I won't name it, and that AARP is liberal. And so, where do you folks sit on the political spectrum?
Well, we've been a nonpartisan organization from our start, and we have worked with leaders of both sides to try to get things done for people 50 and plus. And so what that tends to mean is there's always one side that's mad at us. I feel if we go too long and both sides haven't been mad at us, then we're probably not doing it right. And the reality is we've heard it from folks on the left who are unhappy when we supported the Medicare Part D plan that President George W. Bush put forward. We've heard it from folks on the right around this particular issue, and that's just the nature of the business of being a nonpartisan issue advocate in a really partisan political environment.
I'm smiling, of course, for our TV viewers because Reagan and I often get told about Florida Roundtable that there's one side or another always mad at us.
Yes.
Liberals think we're conservative fascists. Conservatives think that we're kind of pink. Right. And liberal, and you know, libertarians think that we're okay, but even they don't agree with us all the time.
Right. Yeah.
So we face the same thing. Not that we try to be nonpartisan; we have a very definite point of view. Sure. But we do run into people that just like to be mad at just about everything, and so they like to kind of pick on us from time to time. But that's fine. Keep those emails coming, folks.
Yeah.
Al Spry at fnnonline.net and Reagan Smith at fnnonline.net. We love them. So now, getting back to Obamacare. Now, here's a criticism that I've heard and I don't know how to take it because I haven't done enough. To be honest, I haven't done enough studying about Obamacare. I've done some stuff when it was first out and so forth, but the final version. Now, this is not socialized medicine. We already know that. This is private insurance companies with a government framework. So if it is private insurance companies, why is private is the right so mad at it? Because it really isn't just a government-run insurance company. What aspect are they angry at?
Well, I would have to say, I mean, there's an element of this that is about political posturing, and you just have to set that aside and say, on the issues, what are the concerns? Mm-hmm. And I think that there are obviously everybody who's looked at this has said, well, you could have done this differently, or you could have done that differently. And I'm so glad that this is not, my piece of legislation, that this is what happens when you have a compromise. You have something that everybody's a little bit unhappy with. I think that there are folks on the right who would have loved for there to be more emphasis put on individuals as consumers buying insurance, or not just insurance, but their health care directly. And there are probably folks on the left who would have preferred that there be more of a single-payer system, somewhat like what you see with Medicare, where the government actually did more of the work. And so we end up with this thing in the middle. And it's a concept that we've seen both sides embrace at different points. The Heritage Foundation was one of the first to raise this whole concept of an insurance marketplace with an individual mandate, and it's what you saw in Massachusetts when Governor Romney was there. And certainly folks on the left have said, well, this is a pretty good possibility as well. So it's one of those that people get mad at it, and many times when you talk to them, they haven't actually gotten to what this bill actually does. I know back, when this legislation was first being discussed before it became law, there was a number of surveys that the Kaiser Family Foundation, some other respected health foundations did that said, what do you think about Obamacare? And you had the same numbers that you see today. I mean, they're consistently pretty split. But then they would say, well, what do you think about getting rid of pre-existing conditions? Oh, we love that. What do you think about allowing adult children to stay on insurance until they're 26? Oh, we love that. What do you think about being able to buy insurance from private insurers? And if you're low income, there's a little government help to make sure that you can actually afford it. Hey, that sounds pretty good. You put all the things together that are in this, and people like it individually, and then you ask them for the brand name, and that's where things fall apart.
Right, but then, of course, there's the posturing with, my favorite was Sarah Palin and the death panels. That was my favorite, where people would sit on a panel and decide who's going to live and who's going to die.
Right, well, and Al, we laugh about it, except there are people who still believe that's going to happen. And I think that we were talking earlier before the break about the impact on Medicare, and one of the biggest things to get out to people is that, look, this law helps close the Medicare Part D donut hole, and it provides preventive benefits. It does not set up anything that will deny care, and it is a shame, frankly, that anybody would spread rumors of that which have no basis in the law.
I want to take, well, we still have a couple of minutes here, the AARP positions or the plans that you're going to be involved with. There are multiple levels, and I wanted to talk about that.
Let me talk a little bit about this. And this is not really AARP stuff. This is what anybody who goes to healthcare.gov, which is where that federal marketplace is that we talk about, come October 1st, what they're going to see, because it's important, because it helps people compare apples to apples. So when you go buy health insurance, if you're an individual, there will be 4 different types of plans, and they're imaginatively bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. As you would think, the bronze plan covers the least, the platinum plan covers the most, and they balance out to, I think the bronze covers about 60% of your costs, the platinum covers 90% of the costs, and then in between. They all cover the same sorts of things. They all cover hospital bills, ER bills, doctor's bills, prescription drug costs, all those basic things, but it's just the level of coverage versus likely higher premiums for the more expensive plans. So when people are thinking about this, they can really make some choices about how much of my healthcare costs am I willing to pay out of pocket as I go versus how much do I want to be able to just pay one premium and have less to pay out of pocket.
And before we go, final question here.
Sure.
How do we find, obviously you just gave out the healthcare.gov site starting on October 1st. Any other sites to help people with any further questions that perhaps we didn't cover?
Yeah, thanks, Al. The AARP does have a site that we've put together that really is just about answering questions, and it's called healthlawanswers.org. And at that site, healthlawanswers.org, it'll ask you the basic information like we talked about today. Are you already on Medicare? Are you not yet eligible for Medicare? Do you have employer insurance? Do you buy insurance individually or not have insurance? And it takes that very basic, no confidential personal information, and it comes back to you and says, okay, here's what's going on in Florida. Here are the decisions you need to make. Here are the options that you have. And so it's a great way to help answer those questions, and there's just a ton of information on that site.
Jeff Johnson, the state director of the AARP. Now you know how you can be in touch with them and find out all this information about this Obamacare that is rapidly descending upon us. October 1st, the wheels go into motion. And Jeff, it has been a delight chatting with you, and we hope that you will come back and do this again.
Likewise, would love to, Reagan and Al. Great show, and I appreciate you having me on.
Jeff Johnson, the state director of the AARP. This is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And we'll return with more conversation in a moment. We're back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry. Good to be here.
Certainly presume you know who you are, and we thank you for being with us on this day.
Well, we don't know if everyone in our audience knows who they are, but we have a pretty good feel for the fact that I know I change just about every day.
Yeah.
You never know.
Well, it's true.
Let's talk, and of course, Jeff was a great guest, and we'd like to have him on again because there is a lot of misinformation, and there were a lot of questions raised about Obamacare.
Yeah. And that is a part of the responsibility that he has as a state director of the AARP, is to try to fully understand these and be able to respond to those inquiries and where it is taking us. Because certainly, I hate to say it, but I haven't seen anything from the government that explains it to me. So somebody needs to somebody needs to tell us what's going on.
And you just can't count on the government to really be that informative at times.
Other than if we don't buy something, you're liable to get fined and have to pay a special tax, I mean, it's...
I'll tell you what,
right.
I'm going to visit that website to see what what they have to say.
Absolutely.
And getting back to Syria.
Yeah.
I had one of our listeners write and ask, well, why is Saudi Arabia for destabilizing Syria, and why is Israel also on the side of Saudi Arabia, and why is Russia and Iran on the side of Assad, and why are we now on so let's briefly straighten that whole thing out. Okay.
All right.
Saudi Arabia and Iran are in a struggle to see who's going to control the region. Okay, they're both very powerful countries. Saudi Arabia has had a delicate and interesting relationship, a love affair, for quite a few decades. And Iran and the U.S. used to be pretty tight. We had a couple chicks over there. Think of Saudi Arabia as a chick, and think of Iran as a chick. They're good-looking babes, right? And Iran goes ahead and turns on us. She finds another guy, right?
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia's been true, though. Saudi Arabia is our, and used to see President Bush holding hands with the emir over there and the prince of Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's been a long-time love affair. You could say that it's a long-term marriage, a little frayed on the edges, but basically doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay? And, of course, the U.S. doesn't care how crazy the Saudi Arabian lady is. When I say lady, I mean the country.
Yeah.
They could behead people and have Sharia law and Wahhabism. I say Wahhabism because I like sushi, but Wahhabism, which we had a gentleman on several years ago to talk about that very radical sect of Islam. Okay? Then you have the secondary players here. Okay? So you got these two. They want to have a proxy war with each other, Syria and Iran, but they don't actually want to fight each other. It's messy. It's bad for business, okay? So they bring in Syria as a pawn. Whoever controls Syria is going to have added influence in the region. So now the stakes are set. We have Russia backing Syria because Russia's also friendly with Iran. So you have that side. Then you have the U.S. and Israel, who back Saudi Arabia from a political standpoint, on the other side. That's basically the gist of it. You have two teams. One team is Saudi Arabia, the U.S. and Israel. The other team, and of course there's tertiary players too. There's Qatar and the United Arab Emirates and Egypt when they're not, going crazy and stuff like that. But basically you have two teams. So it's a way to fight a war without really fighting a war by using Syria as the chessboard. Is that pretty good, Reagan? You think I did all right on that one?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And so in case you're wondering, when you see the news about Syria, think about the big picture. Don't think about little stuff in Syria and chemicals and this and that. That's part of it, but think about the big picture. It's about control of the region. We don't want Iran to have it. We want to have our old girl Saudi Arabia have it because Iran jilted us 34 years ago. And that's the scoop.
What is interesting to me, and the recent developments have allowed Mr. Putin to come back and be at the center of the stage of world politics. He spent years complaining about how Russia had faded and the United States was the only world power. Guess what? He's a major player again.
He is.
And it was through a slip of the tongue of John Kerry. And I have looked at this, and I read a marvelous article about the Laurel and Hardy presidency administration of the United States these days. Oliver Hardy used to say, "Another fine mess you've gotten us into." I haven't quite figured out, Obama and Kerry, which one is Stan Laurel and which one is Oliver Hardy. But they certainly resemble this. And all of this talk of putting aside, Assad gives up the chemical weapons. And while they're doing that, in the meantime, the United States is still sending arms to the rebels, and Russia is still sending plane loads of arms to Assad. What rings phony here for me?
Well, just about everything,
yeah,
Reagan.
I thought so.
And that's politics in the USA today.
Well, I guess love it or hate it, huh? And I'm sure we'll hear about that one. But in any event, let us pause again along the network line here. We'll remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm the shy, quiet, and introverted Al Spry.
And we'll be back with a closing thought following these messages. We're back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And we thank you for the pleasure of your company. A serious note for a moment, Al. We do want to extend our thoughts and our prayers to the people involved in the mass shootings at the Naval Yard in Washington, D.C., horrible occurrence earlier in this past week.
Yes, we do want to extend our condolences. We are very sorry to hear of another shooting on a base. This is any shooting's terrible. It's terrible when it's our service people getting shot, and so we wanted to pass that along.
Yeah.
Hey, here's something to change the pace here.
All right.
We have Pam Bondi, who we've had on the show.
Oh, yeah.
She is the Attorney General of Florida. She's declined to offer an opinion on whether the Florida National Guard can process benefits enrollments for the spouses of gay troops on state property. As you know, Reagan, there was an amendment to the Florida Constitution, of which the Florida Constitution has many, saying that gay marriage is a no-no in Florida. However,
right.
If you work in a federal capacity for the military,
yeah.
Federal marriage, gay marriage is a yes. So Major General Emmett Titshaw, Jr., Florida's Adjutant General, wrote Attorney General Pam Bondi asking the opinion on September 6, essentially asking whether processing gay guards' members' spouses for benefits would conflict with the state's constitution, which defines marriages between a man and woman. Friday, the senior assistant to the Attorney General, Jerry Hammond, wrote Titshaw that his request for an opinion provided insufficient information about the connection between the newly announced policy of the U.S. Secretary of Defense and your official duties as head of Florida Department of Military Affairs. So it's a sidestep. Ultimately, these benefits will be allowed. At least that's my thought. What do you think?
Probably after a study group and four or five lawyers figure out how to balance Florida against the... they can have them, but only if the Florida National Guard has been federalized and happens to be serving in Georgia at a disaster. So,
it's going to have all these little loopholes and things. And they're going to stretch it out. Let's just say it this way. They're going to stretch it out for as long as possible until the Supreme Court comes back again, because they're going to have to decide this point.
Yeah, and
that's what's going to happen. So
thank you so much for your time this day. We'll invite you to join us again next week. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
See you then.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.